Hi, welcome back. In this section, we're going to talk about RAS, the renal angiotensin aldosterone system, and other effects on water salt balance. So some of this is reviewed, but a lot of it is not. So first, let's talk about renin, angiotensin, and aldosterone. We understand how aldosterone is formed. We understand how angiotensin 1 and 2 are formed. And so the biggest player here, the most important of all of these, is angiotensin 2. And if we look at this diagram, you can see that there are 5 distinct effects of angiotensin 2 on the body. So let me go through these one by one. And this is because there's angiotensin 2 receptors throughout your entire body. So the first is it has a direct effect on sympathetic activity, where when it binds to it, you have an increase in sympathetic nervous system stimulation. The second effect, which we've talked about recently, has to do with tubular sodium reabsorption and potassium decretion, thereby giving you water retention back into the bloodstream. The third effect is on the adrenal gland, where it triggers aldosterone secretion. And as we just recently saw, aldosterone receptors in the distal convoluted tubule also do the tubular sodium reabsorption and water reabsorption. The fourth effect is that there are receptors right on the smooth muscle of blood vessels walls, causing vasoconstriction of our arterioles, thereby increasing blood pressure. And the fifth and final effect is that it has an effect on the formation of vasopressin from the neural hypophysis, which, as we saw, also affects the collecting duct with water reabsorption. So all 5 of these lead to water and salt being retained in the bloodstream, thereby the circulating blood volume increases and the urine output decreases. And because of all of that, we then would have a negative feedback mechanism back to the kidney to decrease the renin production. So these alterations are happening on a minute-by-minute basis, 24/7 in your body without you realizing it. Okay, so now I spent a lot of time talking about RAS, and I want to talk about something else that is very important that we haven't mentioned yet. And these are our Natchi uretic peptides. So that prefix Natchi, that has to do with sodium. And uretic has to do with ureases, as in urine productions. So there are 2 of these peptides. The first one is known as atrionatriuretic peptide, sometimes called protein, sometimes called hormone. And this is a protein that is secreted by the atria in the heart, the right atrium and the left atrium, when those atria are stretched due to an increase in volume. Now, the half-life of this is only about 2 minutes, and we do have synthetic ANP that we can give to patients, but it causes majorly changes in blood pressure almost immediately, so it's only given in emergency rooms and intensive care. It's not a medication that you can take on your own. Now, similar to ANP is another peptide called BNP, and it was called BNP because it's made by the brain, so it was called the brain natriuretic peptide. But we also know that it is made by the ventricles, the right ventricle and the left ventricle of the heart. Sometimes it's known as the B type. And it's similar, but its stimulus for secretion is slightly different than the one coming from the atria, whereas the one coming from the atria had to do with like volume overload, causing the stretching of the atria. Here in the ventricles, it has to do with pressure. So when left ventricular pressure increases because of a pressure overload, that would cause secretion of this. And very interesting, the BNP actually binds to the ANP receptors to cause the same effect. but it has a longer half-life, so it's not quite as significant a yo-yo peak and valley. So what does ANP do? Well, it has several effects. So let me go through them one by one. Just to recall, ANP is produced when the atria are stretched due to increased volume. And yes, increased volume will cause an increased blood pressure. So yes, you can also get BNP at the same time, but we're talking ANP. So ANP has target cells all throughout the body. The first area are the JG cells in the kidney. And so the net result of that would be a decrease in renal production, thereby having a decrease angiotensin I, decrease angiotensin II, thereby causing vasodilation of blood vessels, causing a decrease in blood pressure. The second effect is ANP actually inhibits the collecting ducts of the kidneys, so there is less sodium being reabsorbed so that the blood volume is not increasing and the urine volume is staying high, also leading to a decrease in blood pressure. The third effects have to do with binding sites in the hypothalamus as well as in the neurohypophysis, so that we will have a decrease in vasopressin, thereby not getting the effects of vasopressin, so thereby decreasing the blood volume again. And the fourth target area has to do with the adrenal cortex, where it inhibits the production and release of aldosterone, once again, decreasing the blood volume and thereby decreasing the blood pressure. So if we put this all together and we look at all these hormones involved in water and salt balance, the net result is, by working together and realize that the ANP is doing the opposite effects of the RAS system, but the net result is 99% of the sodium is going to be reabsorbed in the kidneys and 90% of the water is going to be reabsorbed. And we have many places where these hormones work. So the hormones that are involved: renin, coming from the kidney, which starts that whole RAS pathway. Aldosterone secretion coming from the adrenal cortex would then not be as prominent. Antidiuretic hormone coming from the neurohypophysis. Something I didn't talk about was ACTH does have a minor role, but it's a similar role to the RAS, which is why I didn't talk about it. And then kind of counteracting those effects would be the HO natriuretic peptide. So this is an inhibitory effect, counteracting all the effects of renal angiotensin, aldosterone, and antidiuretic hormone. So with that, I hope we have repeated it enough times that you totally understand it. At this point, I want to thank you so much for sticking with this, and I will see you at our next class. Have a great day until then.